Hello and welcome back to the world of Spirit and Shield. As always, my name is John and I will continue to be your guide on this journey. So if you stick around to the end of this video, there is a secret about the last story that we had in the world of Spirit and Shield. So go and stick around, or I guess you can just skip forward to the end of the video. But there is a very significant secret at the end of this video. For those of you who did not get a chance to see our last short story before the Petals Fall, go ahead and stop watching this video now. Go back and watch that story first. Okay, there will be quite a few spoilers and we don't want to spoil anything for you. Okay, so go ahead and we'll meet you back here. For the rest of you, let's go and jump right into it. Before the Petals Fall was actually inspired largely by a Scottish song. The song is called Siuil. Like half the song's in Gaelic, half is in English. I heard it when I was pretty young, and my sister used to like this group called Celtic Woman, and I'll actually throw their version of Siuil down below. They're actually a very, very amazing group. My only complaint about them is that they're too perfect. You know, like I like my music to have a little bit of grit, a little bit of imperfection in it. But still awesome music. If you like traditional Celtic music, go and check them out. Anyway, in the song Siuil, there is a woman who is basically like the narrator of the song, and she says, I'd sell my rod, I'd sell my reel, I'd sell my only spinning wheel to buy my love a sword of steel. So that line in the song is directly where this story came from, at least the main idea. And again, like I heard that song when I was a kid, always loved it, partially because it is in another language. And of course for the music itself, it is a very beautiful song. But that imagery kind of stuck with me, that she was willing to go to such lengths in order to buy her beloved a weapon. So I figured I'd take that a step further, and she's not just looking for a weapon, she's looking for a suit of armor, and a good one, so that he will be protected as well. I've got to be honest, I'm not really sure how well I did with this story. I like the story itself, I like the ending. I think I need to work on some of the earlier parts though. So I'll kind of work through this one and probably change quite a bit. I feel like there should be some kind of symbolism with the different men that she meets along the way. And like she meets enough that there's definitely the possibility for that. They do have different personalities, different characteristics. And maybe I'll work some kind of antagonist into this story as well. Someone that, you know, pops up again and again. Maybe some kind of inspector or someone with the Brockie. Which, if you notice, the Brockie pop up for the first time in this story. It is basically a secret police agency. So they're going around trying to catch people who are like breaking the law, trying to subvert the government. And in this story, at this point in time in the Spirit and Shield world, so at this point in time that does include any sale of weaponry or armor, and also the sale of silkstones, which aren't actually magical themselves, but they can be used to produce better effect with magic. So that's the reason for the banning of the silkstones. The government in power in Hellenica at this time, at the time of this story, is very much against traditional magic, seeing it as like superstition and something that is counter to a modern society. So they're going to kind of try to eliminate it completely. But the main thing is that at this point they fear it a lot. They know that it is powerful, it's something they don't quite understand. So they're going to try to kind of sideline that as much as possible. So sale of silkstones, trade of silkstones is forbidden. Let's take a moment and go ahead and talk about Hellenica for a little bit. Hellenica is a series of city-states, and we've actually already run into most of them at this point. Hellenica comes from a word, Hallen, which means valley, at least in this world. But so it's basically the land of the valley. and it describes all of these city-states together. And again, at this point, they do have a unified government, but they do have their own characteristics as well. And some of them, like Cambria, are more separate and have a little bit more autonomy than the others. But we'll get more into that later. I'll actually post some additional content related to the history of Hellenica and basically how each of the city-states was brought into this union of city-states. Okay, and their kind of their relationship with each other. In the first story, we had the Waker of Waves. We actually run into two of the city-states. We have Cambria and Allenekia. Allenekia is the only island city-state in Hellenica. Cambria has its own unique place in in this union of city-states as well. So we have Cambria, Allenekia, and in The Men Who Fight, we run into Noria, which is essentially big, flat farmland. It's right next to the river Nor. It is very fertile ground. It's kind of on the edge of Hellenica, and one of the last city-states to be added. But it's basically, like people say that, Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Noria is the breadbasket of Hellenica. And in this story, we add two more places. We have Tortonia, where we start at the beginning of the story. It's not an island itself, but it is on the coast of Hellenica. And so, that being said, it's basically a port city. Everything in this city revolves around that productive port. I'll be honest, I don't really know that much about Tortonia at this point. It just kind of popped up in the story. I had the idea of it being a port city for a while, but haven't really fleshed out too many of the details about Tortonia itself. So it might be time for a story to take place solely there, just to kind of explore it a bit. Of course, after starting in Tortonia, we travel to Selandia. Selandia plays a very significant role in this world, in the main story, and in the fantasy novel that I'm going to write in the future. So kind of keep an eye on Selandia. It is vital. In Before the Petals Fall, we just get a little bit of a glimpse of it, but we see a large amount of destruction following some kind of uprising. Selandia is basically the cultural and intellectual center of Hellenica. A lot of its famous artists, intellectuals, inventors, philosophers, what have you. A lot of them come from Selandia. And so that being said, throughout Hellenica's history, Selandia is going to be kind of a focal point for unrest. So shortly before the Petals Fall, there was an uprising in Selandia. And this one was kind of different from a lot of the others in the scale and the intensity of the fighting, and in the sheer amount of the city that rose up against Hellenica itself. There will be more short stories focusing on this uprising and what exactly it was about and kind of how it played out. But essentially all we know so far is that it did not end well. The city rose up and it was put down brutally, and a large amount of the city was destroyed as a result. There are some other after effects that we'll take a look at in future stories as well. The inspiration for the uprising and what happens at the end of it in Selandia is largely from history, specifically World War II history. Towards the end of the war in 1944, the Polish capital of Warsaw rose up against its Nazi occupiers. And though they fought valiantly for much longer than anyone expected them to hold out, they were eventually defeated. And as a result, Hitler was so furious that they had the audacity to try to take their home back that he sent special units just to destroy the city. So they went in with explosives and flamethrowers, and they just demolished building after building. The buildings that weren't already destroyed in the fighting from the previous 5 years. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944, in my opinion, is one of the most tragic events in human history. Just the scale of destruction and slaughter in such a short period of time, and in such a small place. So that kind of, like, once you learn about something like that, it's really hard to forget. So I wanted to kind of preserve that in a way in this story, and I found it very inspirational in the spirit of the Poles who rose up against such overwhelming odds. That's largely where we get this uprising in Selandia. Of course, Selandia has its own reasons for rising up against its government. We'll explore those a bit more in future stories, so stay tuned for that. Selandia isn't the only one of the city-states in Hellenica that we see kind of fighting against its own government. We also see that Allenekia is blockaded, though we're not exactly sure why. Again, we'll get into that a bit more in the future, but at this point, it is after the uprising and actually the beginning of a civil war. And Allenekia is largely on the opposing side in the civil war, fighting against Hellenica. And that's where we see the ban on the trade of silkstones, which are found largely in Allenekia, and the ban of armor and weapons. Speaking of weapons, let's go ahead and talk about that dagger. There's a dagger that Melina keeps inside her dress, like almost the entire story. She only pulls it out a couple times. But you can tell that there's some kind of emotional attachment to this dagger. And I'm not sure if it was actually clear from the story like what it was. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you about it a little bit. So this actually goes back to Hellenican marriage customs, which I don't expect you to know anything about because I haven't mentioned anything about them before right now. So in Hellenican marriage customs, there is what's known as a binding ceremony. And this is where the two lovers pledge their undying love for each other, and they essentially marry each other. As part of the ceremony, the man and the woman give each other a weapon. Traditionally, it would be some kind of sword or warhammer or bow, something significant. But they give the other one a weapon, and when their spouse takes the weapon, they say, "I will protect you with this sword," or "I will protect you with this bow, I will protect you with this spear." And it's not just a symbolic commitment, it is showing that they have the intention to put their life on the line to protect the other. So it's part of the ritual, but it goes back to a time when they actually needed to protect each other a bit more, either from like wild animals or from bandits, but it goes back to a time before the government protected them and before there were these large standing armies in Hellenica. So it is something that is a bit more archaic in this world, and therefore it's only done in certain places in Hellenica. Allenekia is one of the places that follows those older, more archaic traditions. So we're going to see a lot of that kind of happening there. With the ban on weapons, it no longer became possible to do this part of the ritual with larger weapons, so they downgraded to daggers, something that you could still actually protect someone with, but it's a bit easier to carry around and keep hidden. So that's what the dagger is all about. It is actually a gift from her husband, who we only see at the very end of the story and for, unfortunately, a brief period of time. So again, she took the dagger, swore to protect him, and that is basically what she's trying to do the entire story. She's going around trying to get that armor and weapon so that he will be okay when he goes off to war. So we do have a tragic end to this story. Melina's husband, Nicanor, goes off to war, and he, this is essentially the beginning of the Hellenican Civil War. And Nicanor fights for a little bit, and we find out that he was killed. And, we find that out by, his armor being shipped back to Melina. And she sees, like, how horribly dented it is, and maybe at this point she's wondering if she did enough, even though she got basically the best armor she could have gotten. But it is a very tragic end. So, that being said, I told you guys, I have a little bit of a secret about this story. There's a part 2. When I wrote this story, like when I had the idea for it, I had the first part pretty much worked out. And then I got some inspiration for a second part of the story. So that is coming. The end of the story is not the actual end. So stay tuned, that will be coming in the future. I do have a few more stories to do before that. And it's fun to just kind of keep you in suspense for a little bit. But you're welcome to, of course, go back through the story, see if you can find hints of a sequel. But that will be coming shortly in the future. I guess that's all for today. In 1 week, we do have a brand new short story, which I'm really excited about. This one is called Impetus. It's interesting. I'm trying to do kind of a mix between a short story and some poetry. So we'll see how it works. I am very much looking forward to hearing what you think about it. It will be much shorter than the other ones, but more, I guess, higher intensity is what I'm going for. So go and stop back next week. If you did not subscribe to the channel, go and subscribe, and you'll get those notifications, and you won't need me to tell you. For all of my supporters on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, all of you out there, YouTube, of course, and in person. Oh my goodness, I've gotten such amazing support in person, and I thank you guys so much across all platforms for all of your support. For those of you who are new, if you would like to support me, go ahead and follow me on social media. You'll get updates to all of my stories, as well as additional content and some of the inspiration behind this world, different pieces of this world, and little glimpses of my own life that are going into it as well. So go and check that out. I do have a Patreon account, so if anyone would like to support me in that way as well, the link is down below. You will get access to some additional content that is exclusive only to patrons. If you don't want to be a patron, that's perfectly fine. I do encourage you to go to Patreon anyway. There is a lot of content on there that is not just for patrons. So you can just go and check it out and learn a bit more about the world of Spirit and Shield. So I want to thank you all again, and I will see you next week for Impetus. All right, so until then, take care.